We're going to continue our conversation now about the credit union difference, the why, that Ema was talking about with Dr. Taylor Nelms. Taylor is the Senior Market Insights and Advisory Services Director at Filene Research Institute. He joins us today from Madison, Wisconsin. Taylor, on behalf of the United in Sustainability Network, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here, and I'm very, very sorry that I can't be there in person. I am joining you from just outside of Madison, Wisconsin, a little town called Fitchburg, where it is a very bright and cold morning. There we go. I'm very excited to be talking with you today about differentiating on purpose, with a brief focus towards the end of my presentation on the changing climate for credit unions. So let me share my screen for you all, and we can jump into my presentation. Before I get started, let me tell you just very briefly about Filene. Filene is the credit union system's only independent, not-for-profit think tank, as many of you know in the room. We conduct research and to answer questions and identify solutions on behalf of credit unions, but we also try to do much more. We pilot and test new ideas, provide advisory and consulting services, and run several professional development communities for emerging and established leaders. So let me talk a little bit about what I'm going to share with you today. I'm really here to kick things off, I think. Sessions later in the day are going to dig more deeply into some of the topics that I'll be introducing this morning. And so for now, my job is to get you excited for the extraordinary conversations that you'll be having throughout this event. So what will I be talking about here this morning? I'm here to talk with you about the importance of differentiating on purpose. What do I mean by that? There's really the double entendre, right? There's really two meanings here. To differentiate on purpose is to differentiate on your reason for being as credit unions and as financial cooperatives, your mission, your connection to your local communities. But it also means to do that work intentionally and strategically, to do it on purpose and not by accident. The work that I'll be drawing on this morning comes from our body of research and innovation, especially through one of our centers of excellence focused specifically on community social impact. And I'll be sharing with you some of the key steps we've identified for credit unions looking to become more intentional about how they differentiate on purpose. And finally, I'll be spending a moment talking with you about some of the risks and opportunities that climate change specifically creates for credit unions to grow. And you'll be hearing, throughout the day from others who are much more expert on this topic than I am, and who will get into those details and discuss how credit unions can respond. So my goal, again, is simply to jumpstart the conversation. Let me say that my presentation today is regretfully a bit US-centric, and as an anthropologist who began my professional research career in Quito, Ecuador, I do regret that, but I appreciate your generosity. So, no doubt I don't need to convince most of you of the need for credit unions to differentiate on purpose. That is why you're here. But I also think it's important for us to level set and underline our shared why so that we can be better positioned to tackle the how together. In a competitive, crowded, and fragmented marketplace like the financial services ecosystem in the US and Canada especially, but also around the world, staying relevant and competitive means being deliberately different. And let me emphasize here the word deliberately. Because credit unions and financial cooperatives have always been different, and their difference has been rooted in a shared purpose that's captured, I think, very famously by this cartoon of the umbrella man who's sheltered from hard times by his credit union. The Federal Credit Union Act here in the United States was passed in 1934 at the height of the US's Great Depression. And at this time, you couldn't expect to be able to head across the street to the local bank and reliably access even the most basic financial products and services. You couldn't get a line of credit or even expect to cash a check at face value, much less get a mortgage. In a world without deposit insurance, you might not even feel safe with your savings outside of your physical possession. And credit unions filled that gap, and they did so with communities of coworkers and neighbors. But I'm also not sure that credit unions have always been deliberately different. And that's because historically, credit union strategy has been in large part determined by their charter. A credit union serves a well-defined community with well-defined financial needs, thrift, credit. And meeting those needs in any way possible has been historically the purpose of the cooperative. Well, today, as credit union fields of membership have grown and diversified, many credit unions have to make strategic choices about how best to meet their members' needs, and often who among their wide range of potential members they can serve best. And that's because communities themselves have changed over time. Our communities are much bigger, they're much more diverse and dynamic, and they're much more online. And as communities have changed, so too have their needs changed, expanding beyond the strictly financial to the broadly economic and social. But of course, the need for reliable, inclusive financial services is still there. So if at the beginnings of the credit union movement, people faced the Great Depression, today they face the after effects of a pandemic and recession. If people struggled then to access the basics of financial services, today people struggle to piece together the resources they need to navigate confusing financial lives. And of course, the competitive environment and the industry landscape for credit unions is also very different today. The pressures on the credit union business model are profound and growing. And in an industry with accelerating competition, growing demands for digital transformation, increasingly commoditized products, increasingly transactional relationships, finding a way to differentiate is more important than ever. So there's an opportunity, I think, to align how credit unions compete as businesses, as financial services providers, with how credit unions seek to positively impact their communities and live their mission as socially oriented institutions. We are seeing changing consumption patterns as people try to align what they buy and who they buy from with their personal values. So a fantastic study from IBM last year found that purpose-driven consumers, those who seek out products and brands that align with their values and provide health and wellness benefits and are willing to change their shopping habits to reduce environmental impact, these represent the largest portion of consumers in the US, now larger than those consumers who are more motivated by value and convenience or brand loyalty or product functionality. And of course, people want more from their financial services providers specifically. The majority of people say that they don't know where their financial services provider stands on major social and political issues. And maybe more surprisingly, there are growing percentages of consumers who want their financial services providers to be more public about their values and commitments. And this is especially true for younger consumers. And finally, credit union leaders are themselves recognizing this opportunity and becoming increasingly more vocal about it, asking themselves, how do we future-proof the credit union difference? How can we leverage this difference to make a difference in our communities and for our business? So I want to talk a little bit in this next section about how credit unions can activate their purpose, redefine their value proposition to create and strengthen a defensible strategic position in the financial services industry. Through the Filene Center for Excellence for Community Social Impact, we have scanned the US credit union system specifically to explore the many ways that credit unions are becoming more intentional in building social impact strategies and driving results. And there's a few key lessons that we've learned in terms of how credit unions have been successful in these efforts. The first lesson is really the importance of knowing your members, defining your community well, knowing who they are, what communities, other communities they belong to, but then especially learning about community assets as well as needs. The social and economic needs of the communities you serve are, of course, very challenging. It's not only that communities face housing and transportation and food security and education and healthcare challenges. It's that communities often lack the capital to invest in identifying and implementing solutions that work. And that includes financial capital, to be sure, but also human capital and social capital, the capabilities of people in those communities and the strength of the ties that bind them together. So as you seek to know your members better, understanding what are the strengths and needs when it comes to financial capital, human capital, and social capital can be a really critical way to identify opportunities for your organization to intervene. The second step is really about developing focus. Where are credit unions currently focusing their efforts? There's a whole range of opportunities, and you're going to hear about many of them here today. Certainly, sustainability and climate change is front and center for many credit unions, but so too is financial well-being and wealth building, housing and transportation, physical and mental health, education and workforce development, small business and entrepreneurship, access to technology. And you'll see here, of course, the overlap, not only between these categories, but with these areas of focus and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There are opportunities, we think, for credit unions to understand their communities and then develop focus around the particular assets and needs of those communities. Now, we know focus, especially in credit unions, can be hard. It can be hard to say no. And it's especially hard for credit unions to say no because their purpose, their mission is inclusion. But we think that focus can, in fact, enhance inclusiveness. So take, for example, these things. This is an example that many of you already know about, but I'll repeat it here because it's so powerful. On your screen here is a picture of a curb cut. Curb cuts are the product of focused activism, the efforts of a group of disability advocates who literally took sledgehammers to sidewalks to make them more accessible to those who have mobility challenges. But it turns out, of course, that curb cuts benefit more than just people who use wheelchairs. Focusing on supporting the most vulnerable doesn't mean not serving all of your members. In fact, as with curb cuts, we've seen time and again how focusing on the most vulnerable actually results in better outcomes for everyone. So in the case of curb cuts, we see benefits not only for those that are mobility challenged, but also for the elderly, for parents with young children, for those who are out walking dogs and other pets. Really, anybody who's using the urban environment benefits from these interventions. Other examples include things like seatbelts, which were designed for small children, good for everyone, or no smoking bans. And apologies if there are any smokers in the room, right? But that was first championed by flight attendants. And, I think clear at this point, good for everybody. So again, focus can be a way not only to drive action for your credit union, holistic and focused action, but also really to generate benefits for everyone in your membership. The final step to developing that kind of social impact plan successfully is, of course, to plan purposefully. There's no one way to build a successful social impact plan, but we've identified kind of 4 rough frameworks, 4 high-level questions that credit unions and others often ask when they're starting to build that plan. You can take a business approach, right? Ask yourself, what specific problem are we trying to solve in the communities that we serve? You can take a more stakeholder-based approach. Ask, whose lives are we trying to improve? You can be more utilitarian, right? Ask yourself, how can we do the most good for the most people? Or you can take a more futurist approach, right? You can simply ask yourself, what do we want our community to look like in 5, 10, 100 years? But no matter what approach you take, the things that define a social impact strategy are often the same, right? It's about a well-defined community that allows for focus, a deep understanding of that community, both its strengths and its needs, an ability to leverage the whole organization alongside external partnerships to increase a community's capabilities. As Emma said this morning, taking that holistic approach that breaks down organizational silos is critical. And then finally, an ability to measure and track progress, tell your story, and demonstrate impact. Those are some of the key things that, again, we've seen over and over inside of credit unions as they've sought to build successful social impact strategies. So I've got a few minutes left, and then I'd love to have a conversation with all of you about what I've presented so far and about your own efforts when it comes to community social impact. But to end my talk today, I do want to just touch briefly on a massive opportunity to differentiate on purpose, and that has to do with environmental sustainability and climate change. It's certainly not the only way for credit unions to differentiate on purpose, but we're seeing a growing number of financial institutions of all sizes tackle the risks of climate change and turn them into opportunities for growth. Our own work in this area at Filene started back in 2021, when in October of that year, the U.S. Financial Stability Oversight Council stated that climate change is, an emerging threat to the financial stability of the United States, and called on its member organizations, including the National Credit Union Administration, to begin planning to develop the data and methods necessary to assess climate-related risks. We partnered with an organization called Ceres, and you're going to hear from my colleague Jim Scott later today. But we wanted to know together, why should credit unions care about climate change truly? And what are credit unions already doing to plan for the climate transition? And we found that while there is uncertainty among many credit unions and credit union leaders about how best to approach this topic, credit unions are already acting to respond to climate change. Climate change poses real risks for credit unions, whether that's risk to physical infrastructure, balance sheets and operations, or the communities that they serve. Back in 2022, we worked with Ceres and with Callahan and Associates to create a preliminary estimate of risk to the credit union industry. We looked at the location of credit union branches in counties designated at risk by FEMA, and we found that more than 60% of all credit unions, at least $1 trillion in credit union assets, are at physical risk from climate-related disasters. Earlier this year, NCUA economists replicated Filene's research on climate-related physical risks to credit unions, and they found that 25% of all credit unions are in communities at high or very high risk of experiencing negative outcomes from natural hazards. And that accounts for 34% of system-wide assets. And they also found, I think, very importantly, that credit unions most at risk tend to be located in coastal areas, particularly California, Texas, Florida, and that minority depository institutions and low-income credit unions are also disproportionately at risk. Of course, I want to end by emphasizing that there are risks associated with climate change, but there are also real opportunities to differentiate in a crowded financial services market, to diversify credit union lending portfolios and other lines of business, and ultimately to grow by adapting to economic and social change, advancing the financial well-being of members and enhancing your value proposition. And, as with the risks, we're trying to put some numbers around this opportunity. We have learned from our colleagues at Inclusive that, we expect the green lending business and credit unions to grow dramatically over the next 10 years. And we did some back of the envelope calculations ourselves to get a sense of what kind of electric vehicle financing might look like from a market perspective for credit unions. And we expect that opportunity to be, north of $300 billion by 2030. I'm going to skip through here for the sake of time. How can credit unions respond? You're going to talk about this throughout the day, but I think when it comes to climate change, it really is all about, building your own learning and expertise, starting that measurement journey, and then building a plan through scenario analysis, stress testing, and by identifying and prioritizing some of those new business opportunities and climate-friendly product and service offerings. The most successful credit union response to climate change is going to be a collaborative and coordinated one. Many credit unions are very small. Because credit unions are already resource constrained, no matter their size, it will be necessary to develop collective system-wide resources for all credit unions to benefit equally from climate change preparations. But as you think about your own journey, I would ask you to look inward to your own products, practices, and investments to mitigate climate risks, but also look outward to help the communities you serve, especially low-income minoritized communities, to build resilience to climate change and for the climate transition, and most importantly, to come together as an industry to formulate those shared visions, that shared sense of why, values, as well as some shared practices around the how to achieve that greater collective impact together. I believe that there's no better time to act to differentiate and purpose than today. In a competitive financial services marketplace and in a world truly beset by wickedly complex social and economic challenges, organizations have little alternative but to differentiate on purpose, to differentiate through your mission, your values, your reason for being, but again, to do so intentionally and strategically. Your connection to community offers an opportunity to do things differently. Just like at the founding moments of the credit union industry, the world embracing transformations we are experiencing mean that we have an opportunity not just to react to change, but to actively help shape that change. And in turn, I hope, help forge the future we want. Thank you very, very much. Thanks to all of Filene's partners who have participated in this work and supported us along the way. thanks very much to UIS, UNFCU, OASFCU, and all of those involved for inviting me here today. And I'd love to have a conversation such as it is here with me here in Wisconsin and you all in DC about what you all are doing to advance your own social impact strategies. Thank you very much.